All right, welcome everyone to the Xojo webinar. This is the first Xojo webinar of 2016, so welcome to 2016. I am Paul Lefevre, the Xojo developer evangelist. And our topic this week is an introduction to Xojo. Why not? It's a new year. Let's give people an introduction to Xojo. So this is going to be a few slides real quick. Then we'll take a look at Xojo itself with a couple projects, and then have some time for questions and answers. All right, so let's get started. So you may have seen the headline that wandered around a bit last year is software is eating the world. This was in a Wall Street Journal article. And it pretty much means that these days, in now 2016, software is everywhere. It's not just computers anymore that are using software, because essentially just about everything these days is a computer. So software is everywhere. Your phone is running software, of course. Your computer, of course, running software. Your video game systems, all running software. Your cars are running software. Your thermostats are running software. Everything is running software these days, so it's everywhere. And having the ability to create software is now becoming even more valuable than it already was. So any tool that can enable you to create software, very useful tool. But unfortunately, creating software is often challenging. You'll have to learn lots of different tool sets, lots of different products, lots of different frameworks. You have to sometimes figure out how to put all this stuff together so that you can actually build something that operates. So it can be a challenging process. Sometimes it's a little too intimidating, and people shy away from it. But you shouldn't, because Xojo is software made simple. And with Xojo, which we'll look at in a moment, you're going to be able to create software for all kinds of things. We also like to say that it's apps made easy, because a lot of people equate software with apps that they can use on devices or whatnot. Xojo is multi-platform. That means with a single tool, with Xojo, you can create apps for computers, desktop computers. So you can create apps for a Mac. You can create apps for Windows computers, desktops, laptops, whatever. You can create apps for Linux computers if you're using those, or if you have servers or whatnot. You can also create web apps using Xojo. These web apps can run on desktop computers, of course, laptop computers. They can run on phones. They can run on tablets, anything that has access to the internet and the web. You can also create mobile iOS apps using Xojo that will run on iPhones and iPads and iPod Touches and stuff like that. And on top of that, you can also, using Xojo, create apps that run on tiny little computing devices that are becoming more and more popular, such as the Raspberry Pi and related little mini things. And these sort of devices are often used in schools or used in hardware projects, controlling robots and stuff like that. So with Xojo, you can create apps for a wide variety of needs, purposes, all from a single tool. So you only have to learn one thing. And Xojo makes the one thing you have to learn a bit simpler than a lot of other tools. There's not a bunch of different large frameworks that you have to study and master before you can do anything with Xojo. The meat of what you need is all focused in there, so you can learn one thing and build what you need. And what you learn when you're creating, say, a desktop app applies to when you decide you need to create a web app, or vice versa. So you don't have to learn different skills to make the different types of apps. And creating things with Xojo is quite rapid, as we'll see in just a moment when we look at Xojo. It is a very fast and easy tool to work with. You can throw stuff together very quickly to see results and modify it and quickly get something up and running. And of course, it is a pretty robust development tool in its own right, so you can make some pretty serious stuff with it. So let's take a look at Xojo here. And we'll close the slide. All right, I'm just going to minimize a couple things here. All right, so here I have Xojo running. And an important thing to note about Xojo is that you can use it on any type of computer you want. So right now I'm running Xojo on a Mac. under OS 10, of course. But you don't have to use Xojo on a Mac. You can also use it on Windows, and you can also use it on Linux, whatever your preference is. So right now I'm running on a Mac. It generally looks the same on all the platforms, so I'm not going to see a lot of drastic differences here. But when you first start it up, you get the Project Chooser window, and it shows you all the different types of projects that you can create using Xojo. So I mentioned the desktop projects, and these are apps that run on what are thought of as traditional computers, desktops and laptops and servers, that sort of thing. You can create web apps. You can create what are called console apps. I didn't specifically mention these, but these are more of old school command line applications. And those are often the sort of thing that you might deploy on a server or have running in the background or something like that. And of course, you can create iOS apps that will run on iPhones and iPads and that sort of thing. And a Raspberry Pi is not specifically called out here because that is a setting on desktop, web, and console where you can build any of those types of apps and then check a little box and say, hey, I want this to run on a Raspberry Pi. So I'll just here pick iOS. You can see what that looks like. And you can get a view right here. Immediately, the Xojo, what we call the Xojo workspace, pops up. Now, the workspace is it's where you're going to work when you're creating your apps with Xojo. Now, the cool thing about Xojo is here, you had one startup screen where you pick the type of app you want, you hit a button, and then boom, you're right here in the workspace. You don't have a bunch of things to fill out, questions to answer, any of that stuff. It's just boom, you're ready to get started. And by default, you can see here that there is a single, what's called a view in the case of iOS, selected. And this is where you can start adding your controls to it. So I can select the library over here. And I can drag things from the library onto the layouts to position things. And you can add all kinds of stuff, whatever the built-in controls are. Of course, you can build your own controls as well once you become more experienced to enhance the apps you're building. So you can see here I've dragged a button and a label onto the layout. And they show here on the left-hand side, this is what we call the navigator. This shows you all the components of your project. And it's pre-filled in with some default stuff. I mentioned the view already. There's also the initial app that can be used to store global information that's accessible throughout your app. There's other settings for controlling how the layout looks when it's running on an iPhone or when it's running on an iPad. And there's also some options here to fill in the particular images and icons that are used in the case of iOS apps. The main layout area here is where you drag and work on your design of your layout. If I go back over here, I need to just move something out of my way so I can see it. All right, so if we go back over here, I can click on the inspector button in the toolbar, and this shows me the properties of whatever happens to be selected. So right now the label is what's selected here in the layout. So we see over here in the inspector the properties for the label. And the properties vary depending on what the particular control is, because everything has its own settings or whatnot. In this particular case, you can see some of the properties are the actual text that's displayed in the label, how it's aligned, what its color is, how the text will break if it's multiple lines, that sort of stuff. And all properties that you can easily change just by clicking on things and typing new stuff. And it all shows up immediately in the layout editor to kind of give you a quick idea of how things are going to look when it comes time to run it. The other thing that you're going to sometimes do with Xojo, well, not sometimes, probably pretty often, is write some code. And Xojo is object-oriented and event-based. So the event-based means that you essentially get events that occur when the user interacts with your app. And in those events, you can put the code that you want. So in this case, a button is something that users often interact with by, in the case of an iOS thing, they tap on. So I can add an event handler to the button. And you can see there are a few to choose from. The action event handler is the one that's called when the button is tapped. So I can click to choose that one, and I get a code editor that shows up here. And here I can write lines of code. So here I can just start typing. And here, this line of code is very simple. It is just saying change the text of the label to say hello. And of course, like I mentioned, Xojo is a fully object-oriented, powerful programming language. You can do pretty much anything you think you might have heard about when it comes to programming. You can do here, looping, classes, inheritance, up to more advanced things such as introspection and delegates that you often see about in advanced programming languages. So Xojo kind of covers the whole realm there. So lots of things you can do here. Going back to the layout, see if we can run this. This fires up the simulator for us. So for testing purposes, this right now, I'm running it, the project we created, the very simple project that we created. And what it is doing is it's starting up the Apple iOS simulator, and it's essentially booting an iPhone device here on my Mac. And then once that simulator starts up and boots the device, it's going to launch our app right in it. And you can see here it is, our app is running. And it looks kind of like the layout that we saw here that we designed. Not a very pretty layout. And you can see when I click the button, actually, I didn't have different text. So let's go back and change that so you can actually see when I click the button that the text changed. So we'll go back and change this a little bit. Hello there. And I'll run it again. See, it runs faster the second time because it doesn't have to do the boot of the simulator. And you can see clicking the button ran the code, which did the very simple thing to change the text of the label. All right, so this is kind of a high level to just give you an idea of what iOS app creation looks like using Xojo. And just to jump into the other ones also quickly, you can see they're all very similar. So if I pick desktop and open up a desktop project, and of course I can have multiple ones open at the same time and be working on them. I can even copy and paste code between them and whatnot. But looking here at the desktop, you can see it's a very similar sort of design. Same general workspace. There's a main item here where you can work on a layout. This is called a window in a desktop app because that's what you work with when you're running desktop apps. Everything is in Windows. You can see on the library, there's a list of all the various controls that are available to use on your desktop app windows. Desktop apps can also have a menu bar, so that is by default over here. And it's also, like the iOS, has an app area for global stuff that's accessible everywhere. In addition, desktop has checkboxes down here in the build settings that allow you to check or to select what you're building for. So, I can say, all right, well, I want to build for all the platforms, OS X, Windows, and Linux. And you can, in fact, even click on each individual ones to see settings. And here you can say, if you wanted Raspberry Pi, you could switch it over to the ARM version of the compiler, and that will create a Linux build here that will run on a Raspberry Pi little computer. And OS X and Windows also have their own settings. And Xojo can also create 32-bit and 64-bit apps, which are... The 64-bit apps are becoming more and more common. That's a new feature that was added to Xojo last year, and it's still in beta. A big advantage of 64-bit apps is that they can access much more memory than a 32-bit app. So if you have an app that is doing memory-intensive things, maybe graphics-related or something, 64-bit app is much handier. And a lot of operating systems that are being delivered now are 64-bit. So if you can ship a 64-bit app, that's better for the operating system because it doesn't have to load in what would be a 32-bit compatibility layer and kind of run that in between, which can provide a little bit of use a little bit of memory in the operating system and use a little bit more performance. So if you're able to go 64-bit, it's a pretty slick feature that can make your apps run smoother. So you can see the things work largely the same here, dragging things around, adding code just as before. And if we go over to take a look at a web project, you're going to see that it also is going to look very familiar. Same sort of layout, except instead of seeing a window, you're seeing what's called a web page. But you can still drag stuff around and position it how you want, add events the same way to the controls that you've added to your layouts, all largely the same. And of course, because you're using Xojo for all three of these different type of projects, the programming language is exactly the same. You don't have to learn a different language when you're working on the desktop project, and then when you switch over to the web version, you don't have to do anything differently, really. The code you would write is the same exact language. The UI frameworks are very, very similar. So if you've created something on a desktop, creating it also on a web or an iOS version is going to be pretty darn easy. So all that simplifies things. You don't have to, become a master of web technologies of JavaScript and HTTP and all that other stuff to make sure that you can deliver your web app. You just have to use Xojo and design your app and worry about creating an app and not worry about all this other stuff behind the scenes. All right, so what we're going to look at now is a couple actual more larger projects that are made with Xojo, so you can see what something looks like when it's got some meat in it, so to speak. All right, so I thought I had this open, but apparently not. So we'll go here to the examples folder. The first one I'll open here is a Xojo Notes project. And these examples are included with Xojo. So when you download Xojo and play around with it, you can find these in the sample applications folder. And there's lots of examples that are included with Xojo for you to get started and digging around in. I think we're closing in on 400 at this point. So I'll just double click on that to open that here. And you can see this project here has more stuff in it. Looking on the navigator here on the left, you can see there's a window, the main window that we're looking at now. There's also a second window, an edit window, that appears when you want to add a new note or when you want to edit a note that you've already added. And you can always just run things quickly by pressing the run button on the toolbar. And you can see I have a couple notes already in here. I can double click on a note to view it. I can click on various things. I can save it. So that's an actual working app, and you can expand this to see the code that is in the app. So it's a great way to learn and get a feel for things, is to open up some of the existing things. So you can see here, as you open up the control section, you can see a list of all the controls that are also visible here. And as I click on each of them, they'll get selected so you can find everything. You can expand them further to see the events that are associated with the controls, and then click on those events to view the source code. Here you can see the main open event handler for the window. So this is called when the window first appears on the screen. It was calling the load notes method. And then if I look at the load notes method, you can see here that it is looping through the available notes and adding them to the list so they're displayed. And you can also click on the edit note window here. And if you're working on a bunch of things, you can just right click on things and open them up in different tabs. So you can have multiple things open to look at all at once, expand a bunch of things, see all kinds of stuff. So, it works great for looking at simple stuff, but you can quickly open up a bunch of things when you're working on more complicated stuff. So this here is the Xojo Notes desktop example. And for comparison purposes, we also have a web and an iOS version. So you can kind of run them and compare them and see the differences and the similarities when you're creating apps. So here, if I open the web version, you'll see generally a similar structure, a main notes page, an edit dialog that will drop down when you go to edit. And then this particular, being a web app, it actually has a login page so that you can essentially it'll show that you can have different people log in. It'll track notes for the person that's logged in. And of course, just with all the other types, I can just press run in Xojo and it runs the particular app. This being a web app, it's going to run it in whatever my default browser is. So we can see here, I type my name. Apparently, I don't have any notes yet, but I can add one. That sort of thing. I can double click to show the note again. And same sort of thing for expanding this stuff here. If I go back to the page, you can see there's an event handler that's called when the web page is shown. It's calling the load notes method, which should look very similar to the code, if not almost exact like the code that was in the desktop app. So you can see, again, starting to see some of the similarities between the different project types. And lastly, we'll take a quick peek here at the Xojo Notes iOS version. Which I forgot to update for the new version that I'm running of Xojo here. Let me save that. And this looks more like an iOS app. A little button up here. Stuff is displayed in the categories here. The little icon shows in the list. So it looks like a pretty typical iOS app, if you will. And looking at the navigator for the project, I'll close some of the code here so we can see what's actually in the project. So you can see there's the main list view that showed the list of actual notes, and then a detail view that let you edit or add new notes. And again, you can look at some of the code to see how that is all set up. A little bit different here when dealing with an iOS table, which is the equivalent of the lists in desktop and web projects. But it's good for comparison purposes. You can see how these things process. So that's an example of Xojo Notes here. Before I move on to our next real quick example we're going to look at, I am checking my question window. So let me just bring that up here. All right. Edwin is noting the audio appears to increase and decrease in volume. Hopefully that's not too much of a problem. I actually am testing out a new mic or a different mic and a different setup for 2016. So it could be related to that, but hopefully everything is still sounding acceptable for this webinar. And Edwin is also noting something regarding console apps and web servers. If you want to create a web app that actually functions more as a web service, is it better to use a console app or a web app for that sort of thing? And that's kind of a more technical type question. From an ease of implementation standpoint, creating a web app that you can deploy to a web server is far easier than attempting to create a console app and then implementing your own protocols to handle the network traffic. So for 99% of the people out there, I would definitely recommend that they go the web app route and create a web app that's sole purpose in life is to handle web service requests. I have done some webinars on that, so if people are interested in specifics, you can head on over to our Xojo Dev Center, which I'll be showing you in a moment, and find some videos there on that. But that's probably the approach I would go. All right, the last project I want to show you here is what we call our reference app or our sample project here, and this is called Eddie's Electronics. And this is a more complicated app that shows off a variety of things, including use of a database. So this app here has a list of customers that is in a database, it's a local database, a SQLite database. And I can click on customer names, and you can see all the information is filled out. In the database are images for each of the customers, which gets loaded and displayed. And then each customer's address is looked up on Google Maps, and then the map is displayed here in the window, so you can see that as well. Customers can have invoices of things they've purchased. I can double click on one of those to show more details about the invoice, including what they actually purchased, quantities, and that sort of thing. I can even add and remove items to the invoice. And this is all done, like I said, all this information is stored in a database. There's also a report that can be displayed that shows sales data for specific years and graphs it for you. And that's pretty much it. So it's there's a search thing to search for specific customer names and show all the customers and that sort of stuff. But that's the primary focus of the Eddie's Electronics app. And you can see here, looking in the navigator, that it has much more stuff than Xojo Notes. There's several different windows that you can see here. Layout for a toolbar. Lots of subfolders for organization that control the various controls, code that's used for the charting, any graphics that are included, information that knows how to talk to the database. You can expand that to see some of the code that's used here. Code like this to add an invoice to the database. And this particular app is actually localized in a few different languages for when you run it. So there's actually a module here of strings that are in a variety of different languages. And of course, we have versions of this in iOS and web. I'll show the web one in a moment, but first we'll look at the iOS one. This has a little bit different layout, of course, because it is a phone layout, and you got the info screen. I can click on the little iOS tab bar here at the bottom to show a list of the customers. I can click on a specific one, and that slides a new view into place with all the customer information, including their image there. I can click to show the specific invoices, although not all the details. And then you can actually tap the map button, and that will load up the iOS Maps app with their location specified. And then you can just tap the little button there to get right back to the app. And there's also a graph that can show up here. It only shows 3 or 1 quarter at a time, 3 months at a time, and I can swipe to move through the year to see the graph. All right, and lastly, the web app. I think I actually have going to show you the version that's running on our cloud here. And this is the Eddie's Electronics web app that we have deployed to our Xojo Cloud service, which is a web hosting service for Xojo-made web apps. So you can actually just fire this up, go into the URL demos.xojo.com, and you can play around with it. It works the same way as the desktop one, but it's a good way to see an actual app that's in production, play around with some stuff, and then you can also, of course, take a look at the actual example that's included with Xojo and play with it that way as well. All right, let's go back here. All right, before we continue a little bit farther, I got a couple questions I want to touch on, and then we'll cover a couple last minute things, and then I'll take any other questions that are remaining from people. All right, so Edwin is asking, in the Eddie's Electronics example, he noted there was a database in the navigator with methods. And he says, I didn't know you could do that. Well, that's one of the beauties of Xojo. It's a very flexible tool. In the case of the Eddie's Electronics example, if you look at that a little closer, you'll see that the database that's in the project is a subclass of the SQLite database class that's included with Xojo. And on that subclass are specific methods that have been implemented to do specific things for the database design that's being used for that example. So it kind of provides a way to hide database stuff from the rest of your app so the SQL can be hidden away. So certainly worth taking a look at from a design perspective to see if that's something that can help you make your apps a little bit better. Anand is asking what versions of iOS does Xojo support? And right now Xojo supports iOS 7, 8, and 9. We probably will be dropping iOS 7 support sometime in 2016. Just because it is hardly used at this point on iOS devices. We try to track iOS usage, and when it drops below a certain threshold, we tend to drop it off so that it eliminates some testing and other things that we have to do on our end since not enough people will be using it. But right now, iOS 7, 8, and 9 are supported. Edwin is also asking if on the Eddie's on the Eddie's Electronics example, is the map viewer interactive or is it just an HTML viewer? On the Eddie's Electronics iOS example, the map viewer is actually the iOS Maps app, where essentially just issuing a simple command that says, hey, here's the address, load the Maps app and display this address on it. So once it's in there, you're using the Maps app, which obviously is a fully interactive app, and you can do with it what you want at that point. And then when you're done, you can tap the little button at the top of the screen to jump back to the Eddie's Electronics app. All right, some good questions there. So if you have other questions, feel free to ask them, and we'll be getting to that momentarily. Just got a couple other notes here. So we just looked at a few things with Xojo. Hopefully I gave you a good overview of the sort of things you can make with it, the large number of things you can make with it. And I encourage you to try it for yourself. Xojo essentially has an unlimited trial. You can go to our website, you can download it, you can use Xojo for as long as you want. There are a couple of restrictions, of course. Nothing in life is completely free, I suppose. But the unlimited trial gives you a great opportunity to try it out and see if it's going to work for what you need. With the unlimited trial, you can develop, create apps all you want. You can run them right from within Xojo, but you cannot build them to deploy them anywhere. So that's one of the limitations. Another limitation with the unlimited trial is that you can't save the projects in the text file format that's often used with source control systems or in team development. But otherwise, you can fully try out the product, create your apps, run them yourself, test things out, see what you can make. When you're ready to remove the limitations, Xojo is available at a variety of price points, from just $99 all the way up to $2,000 for enterprise licenses for larger companies. And I'm sure somewhere in between there, you'll find a price point that matches the type of thing you want to be creating. So definitely you can check that out in our store to see what the various options are. And if you have specific questions, you can ask them here. I should be able to answer those. And of course, Xojo has a 90-day return policy. So you can even just buy it outright so you can build things and test them and deploy them to iOS devices or to actual computers or servers and try things in production and see if you're going to be happy with it. I also have to point out some resources that can help you get the best out of Xojo. And the first is our Dev Center, which is available at developer.xojo.com. We'll look at that in just a moment, but this is essentially the repository for all documentation and reference material for Xojo, including recordings of lots of these videos and webinars that have been done over the past few years that you can find there. In addition, we have our forum, forum.xojo.com. Our forum is wonderful, busy forum, and it's a nice forum. People there are friendly to each other, unlike maybe some other internet programming forums you may have perused at one point or another. People don't get insulted for asking questions. People are helpful. So it's certainly worth checking out our forum. And if you're not, if you're just considering Xojo and you have some general questions, you're coming from another tool or something like that, you can go to our forum. You can say, hey, I've used tool this. I've used Visual Studio for a long time, and I'm frustrated with this, that, or the other thing. And I'm thinking of maybe giving Xojo a try. And ask other people's opinions. See what they say. And of course, the main Xojo link is at xojo.com, where you can find Xojo and download it and all kinds of other stuff. So now we're up to the Q&A portion, and I don't see any questions on the queue at the moment, but while I wait to see if there are any, we're going to switch over to Safari, and I'll show you the Dev Center and the forum real quick. So this is the Xojo Dev Center. And this is essentially just our main doc site. And it is still a bit under construction. Not everything is in here yet, but that is being worked on and should be finishing up the first part of this year. And of course, we have a getting started section to start you off with lots of materials that will point you to lots of materials to help you, get up and running with Xojo pretty quickly. We got quick starts, guides, all sorts of things. The user guide is available in this section, categorized in a variety of different ways, which you can find here. And then the reference contains information about Xojo itself from a reference standpoint, so a list of all the commands it has, all the methods, functions, and classes that are available in the framework. And all that stuff is available in the reference section. So you can open up a part here and say, oh, well, I'm curious about the dictionary. And you can get a list of the dictionary class and all the available members of it, its events, properties, methods, that sort of thing. Click on them to jump around. A reference guide, so to speak. And then the resources section has specific stuff like system requirements, release notes for versions of Xojo. And probably touching on release notes real quick, it is important for me to note that Xojo is released often and regularly. We typically target about 4 releases a year, so one a quarter. So Xojo is not some product that sits out there and just kind of stagnates. It's constantly updated and improved based on user feedback, based on stuff that we know people want that are being requested, that sort of stuff. And of course, there's a giant video section in here with, I don't know, close to 100 probably videos at this point on a variety of topics that you can scan and watch at your leisure. And links to lots of other things, including the community section, which has links to all kinds of open source projects made with Xojo and other useful things that can help make your Xojo experience better. Magazine, there's a Xojo magazine, bloggers, that sort of stuff. And the Xojo forum here, let's click here to refresh. You can see here, this is, I'm logged in at the moment, so it shows the posts that I have not yet read are in bold. Ones that I have read are not. And, you can click on topics to view the question, type your replies. It's a pretty speedy forum, nice and large, easy to work with. It's pretty fast, so it's widely used. You can see here it's very active, lots of posts, very recent. I mean, the first page of posts here goes down to just about yesterday, so busy forum. You can see there's quite a few posts and conversations in here, a lot of members, people online at the same time scanning things that are logged in anyway. And of course, the main Xojo website, you can head on over to the download section to grab a version of Xojo for your platform, Mac, Windows, or Linux, and give Xojo a try, start creating apps, and make some cool stuff. All right, well, I've been showing off all these last things. I don't see any questions that have popped up. So I guess the questions were answered earlier while I was talking. which is fine. If you have questions that come up after this that you think of later, you're always welcome to email me directly. Email address is, that's not my email address. My email address is on the slide. So right here, paul@xojo.com. Shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions or explain anything I can about Xojo if you have questions or if you're coming from another tool or whatever it might be. So I want to thank everyone for attending the first Xojo webinar of 2016. Have a great day.